أهلا وسهلا فيكم أعزائي المشاهدين. تنظم أسرة دار الآثار الإسلامية عدة محاضرات هنا في مركز اليرموك الثقافي. محاضرة اليوم يقدمها الدكتور احمد الجلاد. تابعونا خلونا نتعرف على هذه المحاضرة.
Welcome to our 25th cultural season. For a quarter of a century, the Dar al-Athar al-Islamiyya has gathered together people from different communities with shared interests through concerts and lectures, exhibitions and cultural expeditions. I'm so excited to be here tonight and to have the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Ahmad al-Jallad, one of the world's who will be talking about the rise of Arabic from an epic past to an evidence-based history. In 2 days, on the 18th of December, we will be celebrating World Arabic Language Day. As we all know, in traditional historiography and common lore, Southern Arabia is believed to be the primeval homeland of the Arabs and the source of the purest Arabic. In this telling, Arabic was born deep in the peninsula and spread with the Islamic conquests. As it made contact with other languages, it gradually developed into the many Arabic dialects spoken today. Classical Arabic remains the preeminent symbol of a unified Arab culture and the ultimate marker of eloquence and learning. However, perhaps not all of us will be pleased by the way that new research rewrites our old understandings, because it's time to reconstruct the linguistic geography of the Arabian Peninsula. According to some Safavitic inscriptions uncovered by Dr. Ahmad Jallad and his mentor, Michael MacDonald, various ancient forms of Arabic were present many centuries before the rise of classical Arabic in places such as Syria and Jordan. And we are very eager to know more about this tonight. Dr. Ahmad al-Jallad, who obtained his PhD in 2012 from Harvard University, is MS Sophia Chair in Arabic Studies, an associate professor at Ohio State University's Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures. He specializes in the epigraphy and languages of pre-Islamic Arabia, with particular attention to Safavitic and Hismaic. He also writes on the comparative grammar of the Semitic languages and the modern dialects of Arabic. His notable publications include the discovery of a zodiac star calendar used by the pre-Islamic nomads of North Arabia, the decipherment of possibly the oldest Arabic poetic text, and the decipherment of the oldest fully vocalized Arabic text written in Greek letters, as well as the first grammar of Safavitic inscriptions, which was published 2015 by Brill. He is the founding director of Leiden Center for the Study of Ancient Arabia and has led or been a member of several epigraphic and archaeological projects. Before we begin, may I kindly ask you all to turn off your mobile phones and personal electronics for the duration of the event. But before we start, I have a question to Dr. Ahmad, and you could answer during your presentation. Is it true that Jundub, or grasshopper, is the first known record of an Arabic word? Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ahmad al-Jallad.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and I thank Dar al-Athar al-Islamiyya for this invitation. I'm really honored to be here to speak in Kuwait in a room of such a distinguished audience, and I'm also very thankful that you braved the terrible rains to come here tonight. I just learned that these rains are the equivalent of a snowstorm in Florida, and I thought, and while I do know a lot of prayers in ancient Arabic for rain, I don't know of a single prayer to keep it away. So I'm rather useless at this moment. Thank you very much again for this nice question. I'm happy to say that the presentation will address it. Before we begin, I want to just share with you this photo here on the cover. It's a fascinating picture in the Jordanian Harra. It's a scene in northeastern Jordan near the Syrian border in a basalt desert called the Harra, here overlooking a small wadi. And this stone here, and you'll find many stones like this in the deserts of Arabia. This text here, a small graffito, is probably recognizable to most people in this room. Well, can you identify the language and script? Well, yes, it's Arabic, and you can see it's a prayer, Ghafar Allah, and to a person who calls himself Al-Asadi, from a tribe of Al-Asadi, and he wants his dhanb, his sins, to be forgiven. The text, based on the handwriting and the paleography and the style, is probably from the 9th or 10th century. It's early Islamic, but not from the earliest period. Now, next to this text is another inscription. And this text here, most people, I think, around the world, even those who do know Arabic, would not recognize the script. It's a very obscure alphabet that modern scholars have called Safaitic, but the language that alphabet inscribes is actually very closely related to, and in many ways ancestral to, this language. Now, this is just an individual's name here. His name is Malik, Li Malik, and he gives a small signature. So we have on this single stone here 2 examples of Arabic separated in time by probably more than 1,000 years, and separated from our time by 1,000 years. An incredible perspective all on one stone. Arabic, I think the best way to describe Arabic as a language is legendary. And indeed, this was something that was recognized at the beginning of the Arab conquests, and something that was recognized as soon as Arabic became part of an imperial civilization, of the Umayyad state. We have this lovely anecdote by Muawiyah, the first Umayyad caliph, who asks his tutor, who are the Arab Ariba and who are the Arab Musta'riba? And he responds, the tutor responds, well, they're Ad, Thamud, Tasm, Gadis, Iram, and the Amaliq, Gurhum, and Qahtan, son of Hud. The first among them was Ya'rub. He spoke Arabic and everyone took it from him. In other accounts, Ya'rub is considered the father of Yemen. What's fascinating about this anecdote is that at this moment in the history of Arabic speakers became interested in their very distant past. Where did this all come from? Where does the language that we speak come from? And it's obviously beyond the horizon of memory. And so you have stories like this coming about. Abraham carried off his son Ishmael from his land and made him settle in Mecca. And he learned Arabic there from Gurhum, and those are the Arab Musta'riba. Right? So you have this story being related to Muawiyah. There are other accounts. For example, Ibn al-Kalbi, 8th, 9th century antiquarian, who's very famous for the Kitab al-Asnam, the Book of Idols, which is our first account, our earliest account from the Islamic period of pre-Islamic Arabic and Arabian religion. Well, he says the first to speak Arabic, he doesn't mention Ya'rub, the first to speak Arabic were the Amaliq, great giants who traveled to Arabia from Babylon. And they and Gurhum are the Arab Ariba. So you have different accounts. And over here you see that Arabic is something that's even belonging to a mythical past, the language of ancient giants. And then from there it spread to the speakers up into the time of Muawiyah. Wahb bin Munabbih, which is also a very 8th century, would say, antiquarian, folklorist, completely different idea of where Arabic came from. God revealed Arabic with its 29 letters to the prophet Hud. So it's not even a terrestrial language anymore. It is something divinely inspired. This Arabic at this moment had gone from being a language of nomads who on the world scene were probably not that important to becoming the language of the largest empire the world had seen to that moment. That is legendary, and a legend like that deserves an epic past. And so there is no shortage of stories like this to explain where Arabic came from. The question we have is a bit different. If we wanted to tell Arabic story based only on examinable evidence, evidence that we can study, that we can date, that we can scrutinize, what would that story look like? Well, in a way, and I'll borrow this example, this metaphor in a way, from my colleague Peter Webb. This is what pre-Islamic Arabia looked like traditionally to those who talked about it. It was a blank canvas. an empty desert with no sources, because the ancient Arabs, of course, were illiterate and isolated, and so they produced nothing that could be studied by later generations. And so because it was an empty canvas of this sort, you could creatively paint all kinds of stories and narratives to explain your present condition on it. The earliest sources that the early scholars, up until really the 19th century, had to scrutinize the history of Arabic were, of course, the Quran and the oral poems. And the oral poems, the mu'allaqat, for example, go back to the early 6th century at the earliest. This was our linguistic horizon. We couldn't see beyond this point if we focused on examinable evidence. But there were clues. There were clues for something more ancient, something pre-Arabic in Arabia. For example, Al-Hamdani, who was a 9th century geographer, and his book Al-Iqlil, mentioned the existence of another language in Arabia. There was Arabic, but there was also something called Himyari. In South Arabia, in Yemen, there was the ancient civilization of Yemen, Himyar, spoke a language distinct from Arabic, and they had a different script and a different alphabet. And but unfortunately, no clear description of that language makes it survives to our time. Although he did write a description of Himyari, the work does not survive. What's fascinating about it is knowledge of, this is the script of Himyar, or what we call today the South Arabian script, the Musnad. It's described by Al-Hamdani in the Iqlil, and you can see here the identification of the different letters, Musnad letters, with their Arabic equivalents. And now, these don't look quite right, but they're close enough, and errors probably have to do with the process of transmission, of copying the manuscript. It seems that Hamdani here really did know the letters of this ancient alphabet. And indeed, we have another proof. This lovely set of inscriptions was published by Professor Said Said, and what you have here is a bilingual Arabic and ancient South Arabian, Himyari we can say, inscription. And the Arabic, the hand of the Arabic, this is not pre-Islamic. This is probably 9th or 10th century Arabic, so it's in the Islamic period. So at this moment, they still knew the letters of the alphabet. And they were, this here is, we can read the Arabic. His name is Tuq bin al-Haytham. Ghafar Allah li Tuq bin al-Haytham Amin. And in ancient South Arabian up here, you see the same Tuq bin al-Haytham. Tuq bin al-Haytham. A very, very nice example of the fact that this knowledge survived quite late. But sometimes thereafter, sometime after this period, knowledge was forgotten. Okay, the knowledge, the identification of these letter shapes was forgotten. And even in this period, while they did know the alphabets, they couldn't really read the inscriptions. And we'll come to that in a moment. Here's a close-up of the letter shapes. So you can see it's the identification of most of the letters. And they're rather close. This is definitely the South Arabian ta, corresponds to tha, the South Arabian tha corresponding to Arabic tha. That's absolutely correct. So the knowledge of these equivalents had survived. Now, in the 19th century, European scholars started to explore the Arabian Peninsula. And they came upon this ancient writings that were not Arabic, that were pre-Arabic from a certain perspective, such as these inscriptions here. Obviously, these look very close from a certain perspective to the kind of alphabet described by Al-Hamdani. And we can see that the earliest of these texts were copied in the beginning of the middle of the 19th century. And the scripts were deciphered towards the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century. And one of the biggest discoveries of the decipherment of these scripts again was the fact that, well, one, there wasn't just one Himyari alphabet. The Arabian Peninsula was filled with different indigenous alphabets, different script types. The Musnad in South Arabia, but from Yemen all the way up to Syria, and even sometimes in Egypt, you had a family of alphabets that you see here related to the Musnad, but not derived from it, sisters, being used across the peninsula to express a variety of different languages. And each one of these alphabets, of course, there are still many text or alphabet types in Arabia that remain undeciphered. So there are texts today, the alphabets, the identification of the sound values of the different glyphs is unknown. There are undeciphered alphabets in Arabia. There are musnad ones, there are musnad scripts, but they are not understood yet. And when you put those all on the map, this is what Arabia looks like, the linguistic geography of Arabia based on the epigraphic evidence. So instead of seeing that blank desert with a sea of Arabic, we see, in fact, a tremendous amount of variation, different script types and languages all over the peninsula. Some that must have died out a millennium before the rise of Islam, and some that may have continued and that did continue even past the rise of Islam, like we saw in South Arabia with the Musnad. The other big revelation that the study of these inscriptions produced is Yemen was, of course, an ancient civilization going back to the second millennium BCE. The earliest inscriptions might be 10th century, 11th century BCE. But they did not record the Arabic language. Remember, in the popular imagination, Yemen was the home of the purest Arabic. So what a surprise it was when these ancient inscriptions were deciphered and they contained languages that were as distantly related to Arabic as Hebrew and Aramaic are to Arabic. Incredible. There was, in fact, a family of languages, indigenous languages in South Arabia that were used in the different major kingdoms of ancient Yemen. For example, around this area, you had the language of Saba, which we call Sabaic. In Hadramaut, you had Hazramitic language, which is distinct from Sabaic, very different. And Qataban, Ma'in, each had their independent languages. And of course, many different dialects as well. Yemen was incredibly diverse linguistically and culturally, but there was one thing missing from the most ancient period of Yemen: Arabic and Arabs, right? North and Central Arabia as well. Wherever you went, almost on every side, you would find incredible examples of writing and inscriptions. These, to the untrained eye, may look like the same alphabet, but they're not. They're very different, and you cannot read them in the same way. These are inscriptions from Central Arabia, Hail, a script called Thamudic B, even as north of the Hawran, this is Ismaic, and the oasis of Tema, ancient Tema had its own alphabet, so wherever you went, you had examples of writing. And to show you how distant some of these are from Arabic, we can try to read a few of them. So this is a Thamudic C text. Now, Thamudic basically means ancient Arabian alphabet that has not been properly understood or classified. It has no direct relationship with the tribe of Thamud. It's sort of a placeholder. And C is a subclassification. So it's all very technical, but it's a way of classifying these kinds of letter shapes. Now, we can read these letters. The letter shapes are clear. They're not controversial, but they don't produce sentences we can understand. They seem to be in a language rather distant from the Arabic we're used to. So we can see here we have wadada fasa wata'ala asasa wadada. So wadad is a good Semitic root, which means love or greeting, but that's as far as we can get. And that wadad root is in all the Semitic languages, so it's not necessarily very informative. But sometimes, when you just write names, we can understand them. These come from the Medina area. This person writes his name, Ana Abu Sa'ad or Abu Sa'id, perfectly fine. But of course, a name doesn't tell us very much about the language an individual might be speaking. And this one here, Wadha, Walid Aus or Walad Aus or what have you. So these are names that we can actually understand. They're a bit closer to Arabic, at least in their etymology. And even as far south as Mecca, oh, I forgot to do the arrows. Even as far south as Mecca, there are a few inscriptions. And of course, these don't really produce anything that we can quite understand. So these are pre-Arabic texts. They were here before Arabic arrived, which of course produces the question, when did Arabic arrive and where did it come from, especially if not Yemen? Well, I'll show you another text from northeastern Jordan. Now, most scholars until recently would say, okay, this belongs to the same ancient North Arabian family, it's in that alphabet. But look at the difference when we read this text. So it would be Li Garm Il, so by Garm Il, son of Sa'ad, son of Qahash, that's the name, and then we'll begin with the narrative, which is right here. وَبَغَيَ أَخَاهُ فَلَمْ يَعُدْ فَقَصَفَ. And all of a sudden, we have a language that is a little bit easier to understand. And especially if you paid attention to the grammar, you have this interesting construction here, lam ya'ud. He did not return. And the Arabic is, in fact, the only Semitic language that negates the past tense this way. It's a fingerprint of Arabic. It's something that only occurs in Arabic. So even if we don't want to call this Arabic, it is something very close to Arabic. And we'll get to this in a bit. But most people, most scholars in the past would not have considered this, even though I think everyone in this room could understand the language, would not have considered it Arabic. Now, the epigraphic explorations of Arabia did push back the horizon of Arabic's past, yes, but not that far. Only a handful of inscriptions that were considered Arabic by the scholarly community were discovered in all of these surveys. Inscriptions mostly in Syria as well. For example, the Harran inscription over here, which has an Arabic text. And these are all in the Arabic script. You'll see that they're all from the 6th century, 512, 568. And this very famous inscription, which is in the Louvre, the funerary epitaph, the funerary monument of Imru al-Qais bar Amru, who calls himself Malik al-Arab Kullah, king of all the Arabs. And that is 328. The thing that all four of these inscriptions have in common is that they are written in the same alphabet, different stages of the same alphabet. That's important to keep in mind. So the horizon of Arabic was pushed back a few centuries, but not that far, and the definition remained very limited. So where is Arabic? Now that's very strange. How did Arabic just appear in the 4th century? And why is it that when we look all over the Arabian Peninsula, we can't find this language? Well, it's largely, in my opinion, and I hope to convince you of this as well, a matter of definition, and particularly bad definitions. So early on, one of the features that was understood in the ancient inscriptions that could be recognized first was the shape of the definite article, the word for the, which we know in Arabic, in standard Arabic, is al. Now we know that some other Arabic dialects use or an or just a, but we think in terms of standard Arabic and we say al is the marker of Arabic. So if an inscription does not have al, it is not Arabic. Well, who said? That's a rather arbitrary claim. The shape of a definite article doesn't prevent communication, understanding, and in fact, it's a very superficial feature. The second thing is limiting the understanding of Arabic to Western textbooks. Remember, most of the people working on this, their model of Arabic comes from Arabic grammars in foreign languages. And these grammars describe a very narrow kind of Arabic, that is textbook grammar Arabic. So for example, you might find someone saying that Arabic, the past tense verb of bana in Arabic, to build, banaya, has to be bana with a long a. If it has a ya there, like bane or banai, that's not allowed, that's not Arabic. Well, come on. We have, if you read the Arab grammarians, you know that some dialects had bane. In fact, some qira'at of the Quran will say bane. They'll use the a vowel for the alif maqsura. This is not a non-Arabic feature, it's just a feature that you don't find in Western grammars of Arabic. So you see a very limited perspective of the language, limited the definition of the language as well. And the confusion of language and script. Of course, when we think of Arabic, we think of the Arabic script as well. We see even that the same claim was made by Wahab bin Munabbih, that Arabic language and script were revealed together as a package. So we kind of merge these together and we forget that in fact language and script are two different things. And any language can be written with various degrees of success in any script. And these two things can be separated. So just to give you an illustrative example, imagine if we used the same way of talking about Arabic's history when talking about the history of Egyptian. We would say that Egyptian written in hieroglyphs has nothing to do with Egyptian written in the Coptic alphabet. Two different unrelated languages. They're not in a developmental line with each other. They're separate. Look at how we end up cutting the history of the Egyptian language in two and alienating both sides from each other. And we would be stuck with this problem of where did Coptic appear from? Or even if we use the idea of a definite article. Well, Coptic has a definite article, it has a word for the, but the most ancient inscriptions, most ancient stages of Egyptian don't have a word for the. Languages change. Languages change, and it is anachronistic for us to expect to find the exact same language we use today 3,000 years in the past. And that kind of anachronistic attitude has led to this illusion, to this idea that Arabic was just simply not written before Islam until maybe a century or a few before it. But once we get rid of this kind of ideology and get rid of these lazy definitions, we find out that Arabic, that the Islamic period and that the period where Muawiyah is asking about the history of the Arabic language, that is basically the midpoint, the halfway point in the history of Arabic. And that there is another 1,000 years or more before that of Arabic history that had been forgotten and not appreciated in modern times. To drive this point home, I want to show you how much the English language has changed in the last 1,000, 1,200 years. This is a poem in the West Saxon dialect of Old English. Okay, here's the translation, and I will play it for you. And then when I read these ancient Arabic inscriptions later, you will appreciate how stable, in fact, even Arabic from 2,000, 2,500 years ago is. So this is English. If we applied, again, the Arabic methodology, we would look at modern English, and we would say that English just appeared out of nowhere, or was never written in history, because we can't find it in the 9th century England or 8th century England, where in reality we do have a developmental trajectory from this stage of the language, not direct, but in many ways, moving from this period up into our modern times, unbroken development, right? That's the perspective we need when talking about Arabic. So, how do we define Arabic and how do we know what we're looking for? Well, I want to be neutral. I don't want to make assumptions about what people may have called their languages. Let's just talk in linguistic terms. We're looking for packages of linguistic features, like lam ya'ud. That is an Arabic feature. It only occurs in Arabic. We don't find it in any other Semitic language. And there is a number of features like this that are just particular to Arabic. And they give us a sort of fingerprint for the language. And they must have developed in the earliest ancestor of Arabic. And wherever we look in the past, when we find these features, these grammatical features clustering in a language, we know we're looking at an Arabic variety, a kind of Arabic, right? And the most important thing here is the definite article, the shape of the definite article, is a minor feature. And even if we wanted to be strict by it, we can still find the definite article in the ancient inscriptions of Arabia. For example, this is a Thamudic B inscription from the Hijaz. It's by a man named Bi'attar, I suppose, and he has a prayer. Ha Nuhay, Ilah al-Kabir, Ilah al-Kubr, God of greatness. Isma' lana, hear us, hear our prayer, right? So we see here, we have the definite article al, even in these ancient inscriptions. And this is a particularly nice set. This is from a Safavidic inscription. We'll talk about, that's the name of this script from Jordan. We find a bandit. His name is Hamlat, son of Salim. Hamlat, son of Salim. And he calls himself a bandit. Lest. Lest, which originally comes from Greek. In modern Arabic and in classical Arabic, it's lis. It's lost that final ta. In this period, it still had the ta. In this inscription, right here, in this inscription right here, he calls himself Hallast, the bandit. Same man wrote a different inscription, and here he calls himself Allist, the bandit. So we see in this man's dialect, he can use both forms of the definite article. And it's examples like these that show us how the definitions, the definitions, I think, of language in the 20th century, I think, are anchored more in ideology and nitpicking than they are in linguistic facts. When we use this criteria, what do we find? Well, we find Arabic and examples of the Arabic language attested in these scripts. And notice where they're distributed. Northern Hijaz, southern Levant, in this area. This is where we get the heaviest, I think, concentration of inscriptions in the Arabic language using different alphabets. And of most of them, Hismaic and Safavidic. Those provide us the most abundant examples. So, and this area, in general, corresponds to where we find our first historical Arabs. So this brings us to Gindibu. In fact, while some of the traditions we looked at earlier said Ya'rub was the first Arab, in terms of the historical record, we have the name of the first Arab, and his name was Gindibu or Jundub. And he was an Arabian king who took part in the Battle of Qarqar, the coalition of Levantine kings who were standing against Assyrian expansion into Levant in the 9th century BCE. So 853 BCE. In that same area, about a century later, a little more than a century later, we find these very nice letters, correspondences by the local governor to the Assyrian king Sargon II. And he's writing about affairs that are going on in the region of Hama. And for example, he writes a letter to the king, I hope you're in good health. Ammi Li'ti, and we'll find out who Ammi Li'ti is. Ammi Li'ti, son of Amir, readied himself with 300 she-camels, naqa, intending to attack the booty being transferred from Damascus to Assyria. So the Assyrians are transferring booty, territory to the capital, and Ammi Li'ti, who's an Arab sheikh with his soldiers, are making a raid, ghazu, on the booty. But later on he writes, he says, the Arabs are going in and out as before, so there's peace again, and everything is right. Ammi Li'ti, son of Amiri, came to me, and I asked him for news, and he said everything is fine. In fact, in this area, you have lots of mentions of dealings with the Arabs in the area of Hama in this period. And indeed, we can go forward. In 673, 672, Assyrian expansion and conquest of a city called Adumatu, which is modern Dumat al-Jandal, which they call the mighty or the strong city of the Arabs in northern Arabia, right here. And so you have several really interesting examples of Arabs being referred to in the same area where we find the Arabic language epigraphically. We have references from outside people in the earliest sources, in the cuneiform sources, saying that there are Arabs here and they're interacting with them and they are calling them Arabs. Now the question is, did they give them the name Arab, or was that a name that these individuals were using to refer to themselves, and the Assyrians took it from there? We'll return to that in a moment. So this is all at the beginning, this is all in the Iron Age, in the early first millennium BCE. Do we have Arabic texts from this period? Do we? Yes, this is, in my opinion, one of the oldest Arabic inscriptions that we can relatively date. It was published in 2015 by Hani Hayajni and a group of scholars. It comes from Bayr, Jordan, top of the Wadi Sirhan. And the text is, well, it's broken. I didn't finish its translation because the line here is very difficult to read and the published photographs are bad. And this is a translation taken from the original edition, and it's a prayer. And it says, Ha melkom wa kamas wa qaus bikum awadna. These three are deities. O melkom, kamosh, and qaus, in you we have sought refuge. Awadna bikum. Now, these three gods were the gods of the Iron Age kingdoms of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. So it looks like we're in the early part of the first millennium BCE, even though it's not dated. And these are Arabic speakers invoking the gods of these kingdoms. And there's another piece of evidence on this inscription, on this stone, that shows us that we're actually dealing with a very early point in time. These markings here, they're on the bottom part of the inscription, and they haven't been deciphered, but they are Canaanite letters. So they're the ancient Canaanite alphabet. In fact, what we have here is a bilingual inscription, Arabic and Canaanite. Very early text. It needs a lot more work and it needs better photography, but it's a very early example of the Arabic language in this area. Let's continue here. This is an inscription from Duma. It's a prayer. Ha rutaw wa nuhay wa attar sami sa'idni ala wadadiyah. Help me in the matter of my wish, my wish, my want, right? It's a prayer to the gods from Dumat al-Jandal in the same area that's called the mighty city of the Arabs. And in fact, Assyrian records record these gods and a few others, but these three gods were taken away by the Assyrian king back to the capital of Assyria They were effaced. They wrote the name of their god on these gods. And the king of Duma, the Arab king of Duma, had to come and prostrate to the king of Assyria and beg to have his gods returned to him. And they did, and they took them back, but the name of Assyria was on these idols. Now, these are a few examples from the beginning of the Iron Age, but we have continuity, in my opinion. In fact, this general area here, the Basalt Desert and into the Hisma, is one of the focus points and one of the richest areas for the attestation of the Arabic language in pre-Islamic times. In these areas, you have we'll talk about 3 scripts there. One script called Safayitic. Safayitic is the name of an alphabet. It has 28 letters, each for one sound in the Arabic language. We don't know how old it is, but I would say that it is a continuation of the inscriptions that we've seen earlier. The letter shape, the inscriptions are produced here in the Harra, where nomads, ancient Arabian nomads, lived. They migrated. They pastured their animals there, and you can see it's quite a rich land. This is actually from June, middle of June. You can see there's still a lot of growth. The Black Desert, absolutely beautiful. You can see animals pasturing here. It's an open-air archive. You walk among these rocks, and you will find inscriptions everywhere. Everywhere. So, in fact, I wouldn't say that we said earlier there were 3 or 4 pre-Islamic Arabic texts. I would say there were tens of thousands. Tens of thousands. And I'll show you, we can read some of these. So we see earlier, we talked about that there is a connection. Well, one way to make a connection between different stages of a language and different traditions is we look for formula. We look for connections in style, in vocabulary, in grammar, and in content. Ha rutaw, sa'id iyab bidhi wadda. So help, O Ruda, help Iyab with whom he loves or with the thing he wishes for. It's the same kind of prayer to the same kind of God, the same structure. And this alphabet probably developed from that Iron Age alphabet that we've looked. We are seeing a continuous tradition being used in the same area. This is a very interesting commemorative inscription. It's a religious text from the top of it's at the top of a hill. And it said, well, I'll read it to you. Li wadam el bin garm el bin nakhar bin ghuraib has samd at the high place. Wa dhabaha gamala alayh. He sacrificed a camel upon it. Fasallama yaytha' min shani'. So may Yaytha, is the name of a god, keep him safe from the shani', from the enemy. Wa awwir ma awwaraha asfara. And blind whoever faces these texts. This, what I've read right now, I believe is probably closer to classical Arabic than most of the spoken dialects today. It's incredibly similar in its structure, its vocabulary, its style. And we also see a continuity of cultural practices that intersect with writing. And this, what I'm going to describe here, brings us all the way to the 6th century, to Arabic poetry. This here is the remnants of a campsite, an abandoned campsite. Athar. And here you have an inscription on that arrow that I just pointed at. And the inscription, the first one, this very large one here, basically, it says, Garm El, son of Dhi'ib, son of Kaun, at this high place. So he's basically saying that he encamped here. Later on, another man comes. He stops at the ruins. He recognizes the writing of Garm El. He says, وَوَجَدَ أَثْرَى قَرْمْ إِل فَقَالَ خَبَال. وقوف على الأطلال. In writing. وَاتَّخَيَ عَلَيْهِ خَنَاي. And something evil has befallen him. This is the ancient custom of stopping and weeping for loved ones at campsites. But we have the written evidence here. And we might even ask ourselves, how did people know necessarily whose campsite that was without evidence like this? So the tradition, we see that in most ancient times, this tradition had a written component. Absolutely fascinating. What did these people call themselves? So we're talking about them. We understand their language very clearly. We understand their customs, their culture. It's something that seems very recognizable to later Arabic speakers. What did they call themselves? We discovered this inscription last summer, the last season in the summer. It's right here. And this, in the rainy season, will be a pond. It'll fill with water. So this individual stops here. His name is Dhahban, son of Yamlik, son of Tawfilos. Yes, he has a Greek grandfather. Son of Zayd. وَحَلَّلَ. And he camped. وَأَخَذَ أَضَايَةَ. And this is the adayat, right here. Watering hole. Sanat, the year. ظَمْء عَلَى الْعَرَبِ. Or عَلَى أَعْرَبِ. The year thirst. ظَمْء عَلَى أَعْرَبِ. Fell on the Arabs. He uses the definite article, not al, just a. And now we see from this inscription that in fact they called their community, their society, Arab even. Absolutely fascinating, I think. The year thirst or drought struck the Arabs, which must mean, of course, everyone living in that area, all the tribes. Let's look at something in the Hismaic text, Hismaic inscriptions, which are in the south. Beautiful landscapes. The Hismaic inscriptions are, as you can see, going to be carved on rocks, very similar to Safavidic. But these texts, actually, we have a few examples of what appear to be temple texts, public texts that were used for an official purpose. And here we even see the same stylistic and vocabulary, the predecessors in terms of style and vocabulary for classical Arabic. I'll read you this one text. It's by a man named Falhan, and he says, وَسَقُمَ لِإِلَهِ صَعَبْ. Saquma here, to be sick, meaning he was sinned. He made a sin, خطأ. وَسَقُمَ لِإِلَهِ صَعَبْ فَتَضَرَّعَ وَتَعَانَيَ وَتَشَدَّدَ لَهُ بِكِلَالِ مَا فَعَلَ وَنَذَرَ أَرْبَعَ أَسْلِعَةٍ مِنْ نِيرَةٍ وَعَفَنَتْ وَيَتْحَلْ بِالصَّحْرَاءِ وَلَوْلَاكَ تَرَحَّمْ عَلَيَّ وَذَكَرَتْ اللَّاتْ أَشْيَاعَنَا كِلَالَهُمْ. I don't think it needs a translation. He sets up a monument. It seems this would have gone in a temple or something to be displayed publicly, confesses to a sin, makes a vow to the deity, making a vow of commodities, then secludes himself in the desert. يَتْحَلْ بِالصَّحْرَاءِ. In the desert. He goes into the desert, secludes himself. وَلَوْلَاكَ تَرَحَّمْ عَلَيَّ. Who but you will show mercy upon me? Another text, very similar as well. سَقُمَ فَتَضَرَّ وَتَعَانَيَ وَكَعَّ لِإِلَهِ صَعَبْ فَلَا يُمَحِّلْهُ وَيَشْكِ لَهُ وَحَبَسَ نَفْسَهُ عَلَيْهِ وَيَتَرَحَّمْ عَلَيْهِ وَيَهِبْ لَهُ حَنَانًا فَيَجْزِيَ نَذْرَهُ وَيَزِيدُ. The vocabulary, the style, all of it anticipates the kind of liturgical language we get in later Arabic. These texts are probably from around 2,000 years ago, if not earlier. This is in the Madaba Museum. This comes. You can go to the museum at Madaba and you can see this text, of course, in beautiful display. Aside from, now those are writing traditions. Arabic was habitually written in those scripts. We have thousands of examples of the language in those scripts, but elsewhere, you have Arabic written in an ad hoc way across the peninsula and the southern Levant in other letters. For example, at Qaryat al-Faw, you have a language very close to Arabic written in South Arabian Musnad characters. At Dadan, in the northern Hijaz, you have a few Arabic inscriptions written in the local alphabet as well. And my favorite text of all, this comes from northern Jordan. An individual wrote an Arabic text using Greek letters. And why is that exciting? Well, unlike these other scripts, we don't have vowels, but Greek lets us see the complete pronunciation of the Arabic because they write vowels. This text comes from northern Jordan, maybe 3rd, 4th century CE. It's really impossible to say. But everything we've looked at, all of this rich, beautiful, written heritage of the Arabic language, it all is a dead end. None of this, everything we looked at dies off. None of these scripts, none of these traditions become the way to write Arabic. The way to write Arabic happened here, in the Nabatean kingdom. Here we have Arabic speakers who are the elite and ruling a kingdom that spanned from the southern, at its widest, from the southern Levant into North Arabia, up to Al-Hijr and beyond. But they, unlike the nomads on their borders, did not write their language. They did all of their business, or habitually I should say, they did all of their business, administration, public inscriptions using the Aramaic language and the Aramaic script. So they used a foreign language, a language that was different from what they spoke day to day, to conduct their business. And you can see the distribution of all stages of Nabatean, all the way around in this area. And this is a lovely example of Arabic speakers, or probably Arabic speakers, using the Aramaic language. The inscription, probably Salima or Salam, or Shalam, if you want to pronounce it in Aramaic, Shalam. Ka'ir bin Aslam, or Ashlam. Di min Yathrib. Alladhi ja'a min Yathrib. So this is a person from Yathrib, using the Nabatean script, writing in the Aramaic language. It's fascinating. And we can see that this is moving into the Hijaz. All of this is taking place in the 1st, 2nd century CE, after Christ. Very good. So, and as time goes on, so the Nabateans are conquered, the Romans take them over, but their story really illustrates this, the old proverb, the pen is mightier than the sword. The Nabateans fall, their political influence disappears, but their script and writing tradition survives and continues in North Arabia and continues to be used by Arabic speakers. And actually, here we are in the early 4th century. We have a beautiful inscription in Nabatean, but it's starting to change. We're starting to see the letters become a little more cursive, looking a little bit more like Arabic that we recognize, and Arabic words are coming into the language as well. They're starting to abandon the Aramaic and use more Arabic. So this is a text by actually a Jewish member of the Nabateans of North Arabia, or the ex-Nabateans of North Arabia. May Sulay, son of Auso, be remembered well and secure before the Lord of the world, Maray Alma, which of course corresponds to, in Arabic, Rabb al-Alameen. And this writing, Uktaba Dna, this writing, Katab Yom Hagg al-Fatir. He wrote this writing the day of Hagg al-Fatir, and this is Passover. This is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Hagg meaning the festival, and al-Fatir, and you can see it right here. There's the word. Where we go? Yeah, there's the word Yom Hagg, and then the al-Fatir. You can even start to recognize it as Arabic. It's starting to get there, but it's still mixed between Arabic and Aramaic language. They're using Arabic words in an Aramaic context, right? We can move on further, and as we get finally, when we start to realize Arabic, when we get to the end of the 5th century and the 6th century, we start to see the Arabic script. It had fully evolved. But remember, we have only drawn that line and said one side of the line is Arabic and one side is not Arabic, it's Nabatean. That is retrospective division, right? We're looking in retrospective, we're saying, well, because this is the one that stuck and became associated with empire and became official, and we continue to write that way this day, this is Arabic, and what came before is not. But again, that is a matter of definition. But it is in the 6th century, in the late 5th, that these letter shapes emerge, and the Arabic script as we know it takes shape, right? And we see it across the peninsula and in Jordan. It's absolutely wonderful at this moment, and at the end of the 6th century, that is when in the middle and end of 6th century, we start to see fewer and fewer Aramaicisms. Most of the language is Arabic, except for the word for sun. They use the word bar for sun until the very end, sort of an ideogram in a way. So this is the writing tradition that survives. And the reason perhaps for this, why this? Why did this writing tradition survive? And why did all the other ones die out? Why this one? Well, if you noticed about the other inscriptions, they're all religious. And they're taking place in a nomadic context where nomads are not using writing for administration. In fact, writing is functioning for cultural, in a cultural way, in fact. It's intersecting with things like ritual, morning ritual, religious ritual. It's mostly prayers. So what happens then when all of these nomads become Christians? Or when they become monotheists? Well, what happened to Egyptian hieroglyphs, for example? What happened when the Egyptians became Christians? Well, the hieroglyphs, which were imbued with a lot of religious meaning, over time were lost and replaced with the Greek alphabet. In fact, the spread of Christianity to Mesopotamia ended cuneiform. And it seems the spread of monotheism in Arabia, Christianity in Arabia, ended these traditional alphabets that were so closely related, or so closely connected, I should say, to their religious practices. Almost all the inscriptions have some kind of religious significance to them. But this script here, remember the Nabateans were using Aramaic for what? They were using for business and administration. It was a bit more neutral. And even though it was a script that wasn't very well suited for Arabic, as you know, it had to be modified later with dots and everything, or the other scripts didn't, it didn't have the religious weight that the other scripts did. And that, I think, and that's a hypothesis, that that's what allowed it to succeed and spread more easily. And also, it became, and we'll see that between the 4th century and forward, the other inscriptions, at least as far as we can tell, the other Arabian alphabets in North Arabia seem to disappear. It doesn't mean that Arabic is disappearing. No, Arabic is just universally being written in a new script in the north, and it is this script, the late Nabatean script. So it's a huge survey of evidence. Let's put it all on a timeline quickly before we end. Let's talk about scripts. So in the first half, and this is the history of Arabic, we went from the epic past to the evidence-based history. The first half of the first millennium BCE, we have a few examples of Arabic being written in these North Arabian Musnad-type alphabets, but they're undifferentiated. We can't necessarily identify whether it's this kind of Thamudic or that. It's very early, and the knowledge about that period is very little. But once we move to the second half, we see an explosion of Arabic writing traditions. Arabic is being written in different ways by different communities across North Arabia and the southern Levant. There are many different kinds of Arabics, and they're being written with different scripts and in different contexts. And there's even experiments, ad hoc experimentation with scripts like South Arabian. And that continues also from the 1st century to from the 1st to the 4th century CE. We see the same type of script diversity. But then after the 4th and 5th century, all we have is this transitional Arabic script. Something happens here. And the literary sources tell us that Christianity spreads. That's what the literary sources tell us. And we see at the same time, this kind of script seems to dominate. And finally, from the 6th century to the present, we might primarily have the Arabic script. Unless, of course, you're sending text messages. Then you use the Latin script and numbers. But this is primarily the way to write Arabic. Now let's look at the story. So we did script. Let's look at the story of language. The first half of the first millennium BCE, we have the southern Levant and northwest Arabia. That's where Arabic, that's the largest concentration of Arabic language that we find. But by the second half, it's starting to move south. We find some Arabic or Arabic type influences at Qaryat al-Faw. And this is the same period that we get in the South Arabian inscriptions mentions of Arab. So it's the second half of the second millennium. So we are looking here at what must have been some kind of migration. It's just upside down. Yeah, it's not Yemen to Syria, but it seems to be Syria and Hijaz to Yemen. Of course, you don't need to explain why someone would want to migrate south. Yemen is a very fertile place. It's a center of civilization. There are a lot of motivations for that. And that's what we see in the epigraphic record. The same is here. And even the 4th to 6th century Najran, even further south, we start to see examples of Arabic there. And then finally in the 7th century, Arabic seems to be attested all over Arabia. The entire peninsula contains examples of Arabic. So, and of course, it's easy to explain this historically here, right? We know what happens in the 7th century that would spread finally Arabic everywhere, and it is the appearance of Islam and the unification of Arabia by the Prophet and his successors, right? Now, there are of course some things that need to be explained, and there are a lot of, for example, at Qaryat al-Faw, what brings Arabic here? Well, Qaryat al-Faw seems to have had a Nabatean presence. There's pottery suggests that there was a Nabatean colony there. There are a lot of trade relationships, so that might have been a way to that motivated people from the Nabatean region to move down, and with that movement bring their language. So that concludes the history, the evidence-based history of Arabic. But before I end, I have a special inscription to share because I'm in Kuwait. And it is the inscription of Al-Sabah. And this inscription comes from northeastern Jordan, and it's bilingual. It's in Safaitic and Greek. And the Safaitic reads here is by a man named Matr bin Sabah, and then he says, the al, the meaning of, dhu in Arabic, dhu, the al of the al, Sabah. And in Greek, Matros, he Hellenizes his name, Matros, and then he makes a misspelling, but we can fix it, Sabaheinos. Matros as-Sabahi. Fascinating. And the earliest, now, I'm not sure about the connection with the modern lineage of Sabah, but it's the earliest attestation of the Al-Sabah in the epigraphic record. Thank you all very much.
كل الشكر للدكتور احمد الجلاد لتقديم هذه المحاضرة المتميزة، والشكر موصول لكم على حسن متابعة، ونشوفكم في محاضرة وحلقة جديدة ان شاء الله. مع السلامة.